Ridicule cuts deepest when the blade belongs to your own blood. Arva stood there perfectly still, while his family tore into him over an inheritance they deemed worthless. They called him desperate, called him delusional, a fool hugging dirt nobody wanted. What none of them understood was that the real joke lay buried 30 feet beneath their laughter. Dust floated through slats of pale afternoon light inside Attorney Charles Lindholm's office. Mahogany walls, the smell of aged documents, lemon furniture wax, and raw, suffocating greed. Uncle Harrison's will had dragged the entire Gallagher extended family into this tight downtown Albany room, every last one of them circling like carrion birds over a sizable, if peculiar, estate. Alva Caldwell sat toward the back, palms flat against the threadbare knees of his corduroys. He taught middle school history. His mortgage was a slow drowning. He had never once asked Harrison for money. He had just loved the man. On the opposite side of the room, Richard Gallagher, Alva's brother-in-law. Tailored Italian suit, hair slicked like a weapon, radiating the cold efficiency of a man who'd built his fortune gutting distressed assets. Richard was married to Alva's sister, Beatrice. He glanced at his Rolex a third time and sighed, loud enough to fill every corner. Lindholm announced, adjusting his spectacles. Silence pressed against the walls for one long second. Then Richard barked out a laugh, sharp as a slap. He scanned the room, making sure every eye was on him. Beatrice elbowed Richard in the ribs. She was grinning, though. The room cracked open with laughter. Cousins, aunts, distant nephews, all of them piling on. Alva felt heat crawling up his neck. That old familiar burn of humiliation. He stared at his hands. Harrison had been a wealthy man. He'd left the profitable commercial properties to cousins who barely showed their faces. The stock portfolios went to Beatrice, and to Alva, his favorite, he'd left a wasteland. Lindholm said, his voice rising above the dying chuckles. Lindholm pushed a sealed envelope across the desk. Alva picked it up. His fingers shook. He tuned out Richard's dramatic groaning about wasted time and broke the seal. Inside, Harrison's trembling spiderweb handwriting. 2 sentences. The ridicule peaked the following weekend, Thanksgiving dinner at Richard and Beatrice's sprawling suburban estate. Alva pulled up in his decade-old sedan, wedging it between 2 gleaming German SUVs. Sarah, his wife, grabbed his hand before they stepped through the oversized double doors. "Just ignore him," she murmured. "Richard is a bully. You've got nothing to prove." But ignoring Richard was like ignoring weather. Around the massive dining table, the Ashwood tract became the evening's entertainment. Quote underscore, 10 underscore, Richard started, tilting a glass of expensive Cabernet in slow circles. Alva said, voice low, eyes fixed on his plate. Richard shot back, leaning in. Alva looked up, his eyes went narrow. Richard's voice dripped with mockery. But something else flickered behind it, a hunter's focus, sudden and sharp. Alva said, firmer now. The smirk drained from Richard's face. What replaced it was flat and cold. "Suit yourself. Don't come crawling to me when the county forecloses." The next morning, Alva drove out to Oak Haven County. The Ashwood tract looked exactly like the paperwork promised, a bleak, punishing stretch of gray limestone and twisted dead scrub. The ground was so dense it rejected water outright. Dry, cracked ravines splitting the surface like old scars. Standing dead center on that wind-blasted property, Alva felt doubt crash through him like a physical weight. Had Harrison simply lost his mind? Had he chained his favorite nephew to a financial anchor? Alva walked toward a shallow depression near the middle of the acreage, kicked at the loose shale beneath his boots. The sound that came back wasn't the dull thud of packed earth. It was a sharp, hollow clink. He froze, dropped to a crouch. His bare hands swept dirt and loose rock aside. 6 inches below dead soil, a perfectly smooth, manufactured surface. Not stone, a solid slab of reinforced industrial concrete. And sunk directly into its center, a massive rusted iron ring, thick as a man's arm. His heart slammed against his ribs. Harrison's note echoed through him. ___, quote, _20__. Alva told no one, not even Sarah. The second he mentioned the mysterious concrete slab, Richard would know. Richard had a gift for turning whispers into weaponized legal documents. So Alva became a ghost. He took leave from the middle school, cited stress and exhaustion, and began making covert daily trips to the Ashwood tract. He rented a heavy-duty pickup, purchased an arsenal, shovels, pickaxes, ground-penetrating radar, rented under a fake name, a commercial-grade angle grinder. The physical cost was savage. Alva, a man whose hands knew chalkboards and grading papers, was soon covered in blisters that split and bled, hardening into thick yellow calluses. Every night his muscles burned with a deep, relentless fire. 8 hours a day under blistering sun, scraping dirt from that concrete surface inch by inch. By the end of the second week, the full scope of the thing emerged. It wasn't just a slab. It was a massive circular capstone, 20 feet across, sunk deep into the limestone bedrock. The iron ring connected to a complex, heavily corroded mechanical locking mechanism. It resembled the door to a missile silo, but the brutalist construction suggested something far older. Stamped into the concrete, a faded insignia, a crossed hammer and railway spike. The letters VRC circling them. Alva sat on the excavation's edge, dragged a filthy rag across his forehead, then pulled out his phone and called the one person he trusted, Dylan Harris, old college roommate, structural engineer, historical architecture obsessive, living in Boston. Dylan arrived 2 days later, stepping from his jeep in clean work boots. One look at the exposed capstone and the low whistle escaped him. Quote, 21 __. Dylan slid down into the dirt trench, hands already reaching for the rusted lock mechanism. Alva said, tossing him a water bottle. Dylan traced the faded letters. His eyes went wide. Alva stared at the massive iron ring. Dylan said, his voice shaking with barely contained excitement. Quote, 27. Quote. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. Quote, 28. Quote. While Alva and Dylan started preparing to crack the vault, a very different kind of digging was underway in the city. Richard Gallagher sat in his corner office. Eyes locked on a satellite printout of the Ashwood tract. Across the desk waited his private investigator, a polished, slippery man named Victor Lawson. Lawson said, sliding a stack of grainy surveillance photos across the mahogany surface. Richard studied each photograph. His jaw went tight. He had always known Uncle Harrison was sitting on something. Years earlier, Richard had intercepted a letter addressed to Harrison from a geological surveyor. The letter referenced the high-density subterranean anomaly beneath the Oak Haven property. Richard had assumed it was an untapped deposit. Rare earth minerals, maybe natural gas. So he played the long game. Let the old man die. Swoop in. Grab the land for pennies. What he never accounted for was Harrison leaving everything to the idiot history teacher. Quote 31 __. Richard hissed. His fist cracked against the desktop. Quote 32 __. Quote 33 __. Lawson asked. Voice flat and steady. Quote 34. Quote 35. Quote. Richard sneered. He pulled out his cell phone. Quote 36. Quote. Back at the site, the sun was sinking low. Long, bloody shadows stretched across the dead terrain. Alva and Dylan had anchored the hydraulic winch to the reinforced frame of Dylan's jeep. A thick steel cable ran taut from the winch drum to the central iron ring of the capstone. Sparks showered down into the trenches as Alva pressed the angle grinder through the last of the century-old steel hinges. Metal screamed against metal, the sound bouncing off the empty hills. "That's it!" Alva shouted over the noise, flipping his welding mask up. "Hinges are fully severed. Fire up the winch!" Dylan scrambled into the jeep, engine roaring to life. He engaged the heavy-duty winch and the steel cable snapped rigid with a sickening twang, vibrating under impossible tension. For one long, agonizing minute, nothing. The jeep's engine screamed. Tires slipped against loose dirt. Then a sound like a rifle shot split the air. Crack! A plume of ancient dust erupted from the seam. A foul, stale breath of stagnant air and machine oil hissed up from below. Slowly, inch by brutal inch, the massive concrete capstone began to rise. It tilted upward, revealing a yawning black void underneath. Alva and Dylan stood at the edge of that open shaft, aiming high-powered LED flashlights straight down. The beams sliced through swirling dust and found a spiral staircase, forged from thick iron, descending deep into raw bedrock. Cold air drifted up, carrying the scent of rust, dried earth, and something faintly metallic, almost sweet. Quote, 39 __. Dylan asked, checking his flashlight battery and clipping a dual gas detector to his belt. Alva said. He grabbed a heavy crowbar, took the first step down. The iron groaned beneath his weight, but held. They descended without speaking. The temperature plummeted with every turn of the stairs. 30 feet down, the staircase ended abruptly on a solid floor of damp, intricately patterned cobblestone. Alva swept his flashlight across the cavernous space. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a bunker. It was a subterranean cathedral of industry. The cavern itself was limestone, ancient, natural, but someone had reshaped it with steel arches and brickwork so obsessive, so deliberate, it reeked of a fortune spent in absolute secrecy. None of that mattered though, not the architecture, not the engineering. What mattered was the thing sitting in the center of that underground cathedral. A complete, full-size Pullman luxury railcar resting on a stretch of perfectly preserved narrow-gauge track. A ghost from the Gilded Age. Painted deep midnight blue, with gold leaf trim so intricate it caught their flashlight beams and threw them back like fire. The side bore the Vanguard Railway Corporation crest. Beneath it, in elegant gold script, a name. The Gilded Sovereign. "My God," Dylan whispered, moving toward the machine like a man approaching a casket. "Alva, Elias Vanguard didn't just hide his money. He buried his personal armored railcar. Must have used a spur line off the main mountain pass, driven the car straight into the cavern, then collapsed the tunnel entrance from the inside." Alva reached the side door. The handle was brass, tarnished black by decades of dead air. He gripped it with both hands, planted his boots against the body of the train, pulled with everything his frame could give. The mechanism screamed against him, grinding, resisting, then surrendered with a violent crack. The heavy door swung wide. He climbed inside. His flashlight cut through darkness so dense it felt solid. Even beneath a thick skin of dust, the luxury was staggering. Mahogany paneling, velvet upholstered chairs, crystal decanters still locked in their racks. But the opulence meant nothing, because the rear half of the car held something else entirely. Heavy iron-bound wooden crates, rows of them, stacked floor to ceiling. Alva walked to the nearest one. The wood had gone brittle, dried hollow by decades of stale underground air. He jammed his crowbar beneath the lid and threw his weight down. The wood splintered apart. The lid clattered hard against the floor of the train car. He aimed his light inside. His knees gave out, vision blurred. His hands shook so violently, the flashlight nearly slipped from his fingers. Gold. Not coins, not trinkets. Massive, uniform bullion bars stamped with the insignia of the US Treasury. Dated 1928. Hundreds of them. That dull, heavy yellow gleam caught the LED beam and threw a warm, impossible glow across his face. Dylan rushed up behind him and stopped dead. "Alva," he choked. "Do you understand what this is worth at today's market value? A single crate." "Millions," Alva breathed. "Tens of millions. And there are dozens of crates." He moved to the next row. These boxes weren't wood. They were sealed zinc. He pried the top off one. Inside, perfectly preserved in the dry, oxygen-starred darkness, were stacks of paper. He pulled out a bundle. Bearer bonds. Uncirculated gold certificates in massive denominations. Effectively untraceable. Fully valid. The wealth sitting beneath the worthless dirt of the Ashwood tract was beyond calculation. Enough to buy Richard's company 10 times over and liquidate it for sport. Absolute, world-shifting power. Alva let out a laugh, breathless, half-mad, and the sound echoed through the empty rail car. Uncle Harrison hadn't been senile. He'd been a genius. Somehow, he had discovered the location of Vanguard's lost train, bought the land above it quietly, then left the greatest treasure of the 20th century to the one person in the family who didn't care about money. "Alva," Dylan said suddenly. His voice had changed, tight, edged with panic. He was staring out the Pullman car window, up toward the open shaft in the cavern roof. "What?" Alva asked, still gripping a gold bar. "Look up." Alva stepped out of the train car and tilted his head toward the sky. The twilight above, which should have been settling into deep purple, was strobing instead. Violent flashes, red and blue, the heavy crunch of tires rolling over gravel echoed down the shaft. Then car doors slamming. One after another. "Alva Caldwell." The voice boomed down the tunnel, warped and amplified by a megaphone. "This is Sheriff Miller of Oak Haven County. We have a court-ordered cease and desist. Step away from the excavation immediately and come up with the hands visible." Then a second voice filtered down the shaft. No megaphone, no amplification needed. Just pure dripping arrogance. Richard. "I told you, Alva," Richard called into the blackness below. "You don't play in the dirt when the adults are doing business. The property falls under county jurisdiction now. Whatever you found down there, it doesn't belong to you anymore." Alva stood motionless in the dark, the gold bar a dead weight in his fist. The first wave of panic burned off fast, replaced by something cold and unfamiliar. Fury, real fury. For years he had kept his head down, swallowed the jokes, absorbed the insults. Endured the condescension like it was weather he couldn't control. But standing in the burial chamber of Elias Vanguard, surrounded by the currency of empires, Alva understood something had broken open inside him. He wasn't the quiet, hollowed-out history teacher anymore. He was gripping the keys to the kingdom. And he was going to dismantle Richard Gallagher piece by piece. Sirens screamed from the surface, their wail bleeding down the iron shaft like something crawling out of hell itself. Alva stood rigid inside the dust-choked luxury of the Pullman car, that heavy gold bullion bar still pressing into his palm. The sheer audacity of Richard's ambush had shattered every trace of wonder, forging something harder in its place, ice-cold resolve. Dylan was the first to crack. The engineer lurched toward the train car's exit, his flashlight slashing wild arcs across the vaulted limestone overhead. "Alva, we need to go up. If that's the county sheriff, they can charge us with resisting. They'll seal the shaft, impound my jeep. We lose everything." "Quiet." The edge in Alva's own voice caught him off guard. The man who had spent a lifetime sidestepping confrontation was gone, buried somewhere in the soil above them. Quote _56__. Alva set the gold bar back into the splintered wooden crate. Too heavy, too obvious. No one climbs a 30-foot vertical ladder with 40 pounds of federal bullion stuffed in a jacket. He turned instead to the sealed zinc boxes. Underscore underscore, quote underscore, 57 underscore underscore, Alva said, jamming his crowbar into the seam of a second metal container. Dylan froze for half a heartbeat, then threw his full weight onto the bar alongside him. The seal gave way with a metallic groan. Inside, stacked with meticulous precision and wrapped in oilcloth, lay bundles of high-denomination gold certificates. Alongside them, uncirculated bearer bonds from the 1920s. Alva ordered. He grabbed fistfuls of the centuries-old financial instruments and crammed them into the deep pockets of his heavy canvas work jacket. Underscore underscore, quote underscore, 59 underscore, underscore. Dylan dragged out his phone, fingers trembling, and started a high-definition pan across the subterranean cavern. Alva, meanwhile, packed his pockets methodically until the canvas groaned at the seams. Bearer bonds, effectively cash. They belonged to whoever physically held them, untraceable, completely legal, and worth an astronomical sum to any private collector or federal bank. Sheriff Miller's voice erupted through the megaphone, slamming off the cavern walls. "We're coming up!" Alva shouted back, his words spiraling up the shaft. He locked eyes with Dylan and gave a single firm nod. "I do the talking. You say nothing about the gold, nothing about the train. As far as anyone up there knows, we punched through into an empty sinkhole." The ascent up the spiral iron staircase stretched into eternity. Each step rang beneath his boots while his mind churned, assembling a strategy from nothing. When his head finally broke the surface, police spotlights slammed into him like a physical force. 3 Oak Haven County Sheriff's cruisers sat in a ragged circle around the excavation site. Red and blue light bars painting the dead landscape in harsh, aggressive pulses. 6 deputies stood with their palms resting on holstered sidearms, and behind them, wearing a tailored cashmere overcoat and a smirk of absolute triumph, stood Richard Gallagher. Beside him stood a heavy-set, perspiring figure Alva recognized from every campaign billboard in the county, Commissioner Sterling. Underscore underscore, quote underscore, 63 underscore underscore. Richard sneered, stepping forward as Alva dragged himself over the lip of the concrete capstone, Dylan right behind him. Sheriff Miller moved in, bull-necked, dead-eyed. Alva's voice came out flat, steady, almost amused. He turned, felt the cold bite of steel cinching his wrists. "This ground is dead limestone, hasn't seen water in 100 years. That determination belongs to the county surveyor," Commissioner Sterling cut in, smooth as oil, blotting his glistening forehead with a silk handkerchief. "Given the severity of the environmental damage caused by this unauthorized excavation, the county will be stepping in for remediation. We'll file an emergency eminent domain seizure first thing tomorrow morning. Public interest." "So you're stealing it," Alva said. His eyes locked on Richard. "You knew something was down there." Richard leaned close. His cologne hung in the cool night air, cloying, almost nauseating. "I knew old Harrison was sitting on an anomaly, coal vein, maybe a gas pocket. But that hydraulic winch and the size of the concrete plug you just cracked open, I'm thinking it's something far more valuable. Relax, Alva. I'll send you a postcard from the new yacht once the county leases the land to my extraction company." They searched him, patted him down for weapons. The deputies never even glanced at the thick bundles of stiff oilcloth-wrapped paper stuffed in his work jacket. Insulation, war gloves, that's all they saw. Alva and Dylan were shoved into the back of a cruiser. As it pulled away from the Ashwood tract, Alva pressed his face to the barred window. Richard was already directing Victor Lawson to erect a perimeter fence around the open shaft. They believed they'd won. Believed they'd outmaneuvered the pathetic middle school history teacher. Alva spent that night on a metal bench in a concrete holding cell at the Oak Haven County Jail. He did not sleep, not for a second. He sat rigid, hands resting on his jacket, fingers tracing the crinkle of bearer bonds hidden in its lining. 6 in the morning, the steel door clanked open. Sarah stood in the corridor, eyes swollen and red, jaw clenched with something harder than grief. She'd emptied their savings to post bail. "What happened?" she whispered as they stepped into the raw morning air. "Richard called the house, said you lost the land, said you're looking at felony charges, environmental destruction." Alva stopped on the sidewalk, pulled her close.
Held her tight. "Richard is a liar," he breathed against her ear. "He has no idea what he just set loose."
He didn't go home, drove straight to the bank, locked the bearer bonds inside the safety deposit box, pulled out 2 of the smaller gold certificates. Then he bought a train ticket to Manhattan. He needed a predator, the kind of attorney who devoured corporate bullies before lunch. A recommendation from a wealthy parent at his school led him to the glass-walled, ultra-modern office of Victoria Hayes. Victoria was something close to a legal myth in New York. Former federal prosecutor, now a private litigator who specialized in high-stakes asset recovery and corporate warfare. She sat behind a desk of solid white marble, immaculate in a tailored suit, her eyes moving methodically across the grainy photographs Dylan had snapped inside the vault. She'd listened to Alva's entire account without a word. When she finally spoke, her voice landed like a surgical blade. Quote 77. Victoria said, lowering the photographs. Quote 78. Quote 79, Alva said. Victoria lifted one of the gold certificates from the desk. She held it up to the light, studying the watermarks. Quote 80. Quote 81. A slow, predatory smile crept across Victoria Hayes' face. "Mr. Caldwell, do you have any idea what happens when local county officials attempt to seize federal property using fabricated civil statutes?" Alva shook his head. "The federal government brings down a hammer so massive it pulverizes the entire county," Victoria said, rising from her chair and buttoning her jacket. "Richard Gallagher believes he's playing local checkers. We're about to drag him into federal chess. But we need to move before he figures out what's actually sitting at the bottom of that hole." The emergency injunction hearing came 3 days later, inside the oak-paneled courtroom of the Oak Haven County Courthouse. Every seat was taken. News of a massive mineral discovery on the Ashwood Tract had leaked, almost certainly through Richard himself, inflating his company stock. The Gallagher family crowded the gallery, whispering with barely contained excitement. Beatrice, Richard's wife, offered Alva a pitying little wave as he walked in beside Sarah. Patronizing, deliberate. Richard occupied the plaintiff's table, 3 expensive corporate attorneys flanking him like sentries. He looked like a man waiting for his coronation. Judge Sterling, cousin to the very Commissioner Sterling who had engineered the seizure, perched on the bench, bored, entirely compliant. Alva sat alone at the defense table. Victoria Hayes had given him one instruction. "Wait!" "Court is in session," Judge Sterling droned, his gavel landing with half-hearted authority. "We convene on the county's emergency motion for eminent domain regarding the Ashwood Tract, currently owned by Mr. Alva Caldwell. The county alleges severe environmental negligence. Counselor, proceed." Richard's lead attorney rose, smoothing his tie with practiced calm. Judge Sterling muttered, already reaching for his pen. The injunction order sat right there in front of him. Quote underscore 89 underscore. The heavy double doors at the rear of the courtroom exploded open. The sound cracked off the high ceilings like a gunshot. Every voice in the room died at once. Victoria Hayes came down the center aisle. She moved with the raw, unstoppable force of a storm front, her heels striking the hardwood in sharp, measured beats. 4 men in dark suits flanked her. Gold FBI badges gleamed on their lapels. Behind them, 2 agents in United States Department of the Treasury windbreakers. Victoria's voice filled the room, carrying the weight of absolute authority. I am Victoria Hayes, legal counsel for Mr. Alva Caldwell, and you are seconds away from signing an illegal document that constitutes a federal crime.